दातुं स कृष्ण गङ्गायां पुरस्कृत्य ययुः स्त्रियः
च अतते सम्परेतानां स्वानम् उदकम् इच्छतां दातुं स कृष्ण गङ्गायां पुरस्त्रियायाहु स्त्रियः
अथा ते सम्परितानां स्वानामुद्दकमिच्छतां धातुं सकृष्णा गङ्गायां पुरस्कृत्याययो स्त्रियः ते सम्परितानां स्वानामुद्दकम् इच्छतां धातुं सकृष्णा गङ्गायां Translation, I'm probably going to do more than one verse here. I think I'm going to go on to actually to text number 3. There's a short purport here, another short purport in text 3. Sutta Uvacha. Sutta Uvacha. Sutta said. Sutta said. Ata. Ata. Thus. Thus. Te. Te. The Pandavas. The Pandavas. Samparitanam. Samparitanam. Of the dead. Of the dead. Svanam. Svanam. Of the relatives. Of the relatives. Udakam. Udakam. Water. Water. Ichatam. Ichatam. Willing to have. Willing to have. Datum. Datum. To deliver. To deliver. Sa Krishna. Sa Krishna. Along with Draupadi. Along with Draupadi. Gangayam. Gangaya. On the Ganges. On the Ganges. Puraskritya. Puraskritya. Putting in the front. Putting in the front. Yayuhu. Yayuhu. Went. Went. Striyaha. Striyaha. The women. The women. Translation. Sutta Goswami said, thereafter the Pandavas, desiring to deliver water to the dead relatives who had desired it, went to the Ganges with Draupadi. The ladies walked in front. Please repeat. Sutta Goswami said. Sutta Goswami said. Thereafter the Pandavas. Thereafter the Pandavas. Desiring to deliver water to the dead relatives. Desiring to deliver water to the dead relatives. Who had desired it. Who had desired it. Went to the Ganges with Draupadi. Went to the Ganges with Draupadi. The ladies walked in front. The ladies walked in front. Report. To date, it is the custom in Hindu society to go to the Ganges or any other sacred river to take bath when death occurs in the family. Each of the family members pours out a potful of the Ganges water for the departed soul and walks in procession with the ladies in the front. The Pandavas also followed the rules more than 5,000 years ago. Lord Krishna, being a cousin of the Pandavas, was also amongst the family members. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sabhagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Scha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakopadrupascha Kripa Sindhu Bhivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. And regulations that are there, they are and serve one purpose of helping us to improve ourselves. Like in any given situation, there's some appropriate thing that we can do, and it's guided by the Vedas, and that's there even in death. There's something appropriate to do, and by doing it, we become somehow uplifted. there's also, aside just from the having a function to do that's appropriate, it also meets a different kind of a need, like almost an emotional need. These are more than just rituals. They provide us with a sense of, in this case, like a sense of closure. So much has taken place. How do you walk away from all that and get your bearings again? Like, how do you start life again after going through all of this? And so there's a sense going through a ritual to mark, to mark the significance of what took place is, kind of like brings some kind of closure internally and helps us move on. And this is there, it's just there in any human being. I have a friend whose father passed away some years ago, and they weren't a very religious family. So when he passed away, the father wanted to be cremated, so he was cremated, and the family didn't really know what to do. Like because they didn't have a ritual. Exactly. So his son, my friend, planted an oak tree because he loved oak trees, and he buried the ashes as he planted the oak tree. So now there's this oak tree there, and then he thinks about his father when he sees that oak tree. So there was some ritual, some closure or something, right? And so it's more than just a how do you say the word? Perfunctory thing. There, it's like catering or even soothing the needs of the human being, like whether or not it's death, whether or not it's marriage, whether or not it's birth, whether or not it's whatever. It just so happens that the Vedic approach is quite sophisticated and actually has the potency to not only uplift and not only to provide closure and satisfaction to the person who is performing the ritual or ceremony, but also to elevate, in this case, the people who have passed away. They can, it's so powerful that it can influence people who have left us, and their spirit soul has continued on. But still, these rituals are so powerful when done properly that they can, the ashes of our beloved people, relatives, family, whatever, to the Ganges or the Yamuna or something, and we have a ritual and we put those ashes into the sacred river, then somehow or other that directly benefits the soul. So it's quite an amazing thing. And so the Pandavas here, they follow this because, for one, they were the leaders of society, so that they're showing that these things should be done. These kind of like important times should be honored with the proper kind of ceremony and ritual. And also because they needed it, because they were, at least in the role of human beings, right? Like, okay, we understand that they're great souls, there's great bhakti yogis, they're not the body, etc. But the soul is not devoid of emotion and feeling, etc. And so the feelings of grief or the feelings of separation, in this case, we might say, might be a more appropriate word, separation of the association of the devotees that left during the battle of Kurukshetra, was respected and honored through these rituals. It's interesting because the the way that these souls left the world was rather, you could say, ghastly. But that's because they were Kshatriyas, and that's the way Kshatriyas often leave the world. Just read this verse on the Bhagavad Gita here. Give me one moment. I'm going to read from the 3rd chapter. We were just reading this the other day together in our Monday night Bhagavad Gita class. A while ago, Krishna says in text 35 of chapter 3 that it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duty, for to follow another's path is dangerous. So in the purport, let me just give me a moment here.
Where are we reading from?
This is the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, text 35. So Prabhupada says in the purport, for example, he's giving an example, a Brahmana who is in the mode of goodness is non-violent, whereas a Kshatriya who is in the mode of passion is allowed to be violent. As such, for a Kshatriya, it is better to be vanquished following the rules of violence than to imitate a Brahmana who follows the principles of non-violence. And it's an appropriate example because Arjuna was proposing at the beginning that he was going to not fight and he was going to go away and just be a renunciant, which would have been appropriate had he been a Brahmana, but he wasn't. And so, it's just the case that when a Kshatriya leaves the world, at least during the Vedic times, often it would be like this. Because in the course of duty, they would have to give up their life. And so what's going on here in the beginning of the 8th chapter is that now the devotees who are present, the Pandavas, are feeling separation from souls who have left. And it's not different, you could say, than in one sense, here we have Lord Krishna personally there with his devotees, the Pandavas and Draupadi, going to honor great devotees who have left the world. And because it's this pastime, it looks like this. But Lord Chaitanya does the same thing, but it's in a very different mood. They're not on a battlefield of Kurukshetra having to, mourning the death of the violent deaths of all of these personalities, but it's the same function when Haridas Thakur, for example, leaves the world. Lord Chaitanya is there with his associates, just like Lord Krishna is here with his associates. And instead of being at the Ganges, they're at the ocean, and Lord Chaitanya, begins a festival in honor of Haridas Thakur, and they honor the departure, and they're in great feelings of separation. So my point here is that we shouldn't lose sight of the transcendental moment. It might be, it's quite, maybe it's more easy to understand the transcendental nature of Haridas Thakur's disappearance because, he basically asked Lord Chaitanya if he could leave in his presence, looking into his, having darshan of Lord Chaitanya as he left, and he left in that way. He left basically in the arms of Lord Chaitanya, and so the whole thing is quite, there's a whole buildup of that departure of Haridas Thakur. It's quite, transcendentally emotional, and it really honors the exemplary life of a devotee who was so attached to the chanting of the holy name, and the way that the whole thing transpires is just quite an amazing, thing to picture in one's mind, how it's described. Lord Chaitanya taking Haridas Thakur's body to the ocean and bathing it there, then finding a place for his samadhi not far from the ocean, then arranging a festival with prasadam to be brought from all of the shops in Jagannath Puri. So quite an elaborate pastime, and it's quite beautiful. This is also beautiful. It just happens to be after a very gruesome battle, rather than, the departure looks differently. So I guess my only point here is that It's the same transcendental personality of Godhead who is standing here with his devotees, going through these same, you could say, ceremonies or rituals. And we can imagine that, you know, while it might have the look of, you know, darkness and grief, actually the devotees are transcendentally feeling separation from the great devotees who have left, just as the devotees in the Chaitanya Charitamrita feel separation from Haridas Thakur. And the Lord is there personally present, celebrating the whole thing. Anyway, I just find it a very interesting parallel, and you know, I hope that's useful, so that we don't, so that it helps me anyway to understand the purely transcendental nature of all of this pastime from beginning to end. The whole battle of Kurukshetra even is no less transcendental. Every moment of it. It's just that it's in a different mood than what's really manifested in the world today. True Kshatriya Dharma, you know, and it's just so different. So different. So sometimes we feel like we're reading something that is almost like I don't know, similar to our own, you know, like reading the gruesome history of a war. But it's not like that at all. It really isn't. It's all quite transcendental. And the thing that makes it transcendental is that the Lord is personally present. That's the feature that makes this whole thing completely different. Because the Lord is present, you know, we know everything is, you know, on a transcendental level. The grief that people feel is not the same grief as a materialist feels. You know, they're feeling the depth of separation. We think about who they're being separated from. Like, they all had heavy losses here, right? And you know, on one side, we can relate in the sense that if Draupadi lost all of her sons, Arjuna also lost Abhimanyu, Bhima also lost Ghatotkacha. All of the Pandavas, of course, felt the same loss as Draupadi, in a sense, losing their sons. And great friends like Drishtadyumna were killed. Their gurus, their martial guru Dronacharya, who they loved dearly, and grandfather Bhishma, he was also lost. And all of basically Arjuna's fears that he had at the beginning of the Battle of Kurukshetra, looking out, thinking about how he would never want, how basically he was saying, how could I live in this world without them, even if we won the battle. This is one of Arjuna's arguments in chapter 1. Like, even if we won, what would be the use? Like, how could we live in this world without all of these people who we love so much? And so all of that scenario has now been realized. They're actually all gone, and they have to go forward in the world. But the pain that they feel isn't just like some mundane grief. It's like these are very, very great, powerful devotees who were very dear to Krishna, and therefore they were personally present there in Krishna's presence. And so we might relate more to their feeling of grief if we think about great devotees that we've become attached to, and if we've somehow lost their association. For some, it would be Srila Prabhupada. For those who were able to have Srila Prabhupada's association in one form or another, or felt close in his personal presence, or maybe we've also had our spiritual masters who have continued their service, left us from this world, passed away. And that kind of grief is a different kind of a grief than just like a mundane thing. There's something else that's so much part of that it can't possibly be mistaken for just something mundane. So if we're going to try to relate to what they're experiencing in this moment, going through these rituals, it would be hard to do that if we're thinking merely like the loss of a loved one in the material world, but rather the loss of great Vaishnavas who we felt deeply attached to and spiritually benefited from. That's kind of more, I think, closer to the state of affairs here. It doesn't mean it's any less grief. It's actually, in one sense, it can be even in one sense maybe even more devastating, because the attachment and the of relationship is so much deeper in one sense spiritually, and so and it may be even so much more meaningful when we become attached spiritually to a great personality, and they leave. The hurt that is there is quite deep. So so they're now going to perform these ceremonies with the Lord personally present, not just because they're making a demonstration for human society that this is the perfunctory tasks that must be performed, but because they require also, as feeling beings who are actually pained, they need some form of closure here into the to the ghastliness, to also the great loss of family and associates, great devotees, and Krishna, of course, being there present, both in the form of the Vedic rituals, you might say, and also they're personally present to be with them, helps them transition. And so it's a very meaningful, beginning to this chapter. And it's very, kind of sets the mood for the chapter, because now the Pandavas, they have to think about, at the end of everything, they're soon going to lose the association of Krishna himself. And so, at least at the, very soon, Krishna is going to return to Dwarka. And this is something that is, even to be separated from a moment from Krishna. And then we're going to hear prayers that are offered to him in this mood of separation. But I find it, if we keep in mind the backdrop of these prayers of Queen Kunti, which we're about to get into in this chapter, these beginning verses in this chapter, they set the tone. So they set the mood of where these verses are coming from, what place in Kunti's heart are these words being spoken. And it's very beautiful. Very beautiful. And it's totally shifting moods now. Complete shift of mood. So I think I was going to keep on reading, but I think that's actually a pretty good place just to leave it, because I guess the main focus here is how we're now shifting in the pastime here a little bit, and we can just appreciate what's taken place and what's about to happen. It's kind of like a Sandhyam moment, right? In these first few verses, a little transition from one mood and pastime to the next. And this is a very emotional one that's very rich and deep with, I guess you could say, background context and meaning. It's very important to keep that in mind. So having said that, I will leave it there. If anybody has any comments.
May I make a small comment? And
yes, please.
It's related to the Navaras. When we understand Navaras, all the different emotions, then we can understand all this horror, all this what you all describe properly as ghastly. Now the mood, I tell you, the mood is called karuna ras. It means sorrow. And it means compassion. So tomorrow I will discuss these Navarasas and the shift that you beautifully elucidated in terms of Sandhya. So thank you very much. So tomorrow, Karuna Ras. Radhe Radhe.
Thank you, Nitya Ramprabhu, expanding this class on seemingly, what are you going to say on such a seemingly short purport? I like the idea that you said that there has to be some closure, and a closure, of course, is for the persons who are still alive, and we see that all the time. You know, when someone goes missing, the family grieve and they always want some kind of closure. Are they dead? You know, do they discover what the person is? You know, like some closure has to be there. And of course, the Vedic approach is definitely the most refined closure, and there's benefits. But at the same time, we often hear that when the soul departs the body, the soul is already gone where they're supposed to go, and yet there's still the Antyeshti last rites ceremony, and it says you put the ashes in the Ganges. But if the soul's already departed, what's the benefit of that? That's one thing. Another thing in the Bhagavad Gita, there are verses in the 8th chapter that state that those who know the Supreme Brahman attain the Supreme by passing away from the world during the influence of the fiery god and the light at an auspicious moment of the day, during the fortnight of the waxing moon, or during the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. And then the next verse, this is 24 and 25 of the eighth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, attaining the Supreme. The mystic who passes away from this world during the smoke, the night, the fortnight of the waning moon, or the 6 months when the sun passes to the south, reaches the moon planet, but again comes back. So there seems to be a lot of conflicts in one sense. When's the best time to leave? You know, what happens afterwards? We know the descendants of Sagara who brought the Ganges. The whole point of bringing the Ganges was for the 10,000 sons of, I can't remember who, if they could be liberated, if their ashes went into the Ganges. And this was like generations after. But you did make one point, good point, and that when Krishna is present, then all else is basically not so important. And for the Vaishnava, who's engaged, on the transcendental platform, then naturally he goes back to the spiritual world and doesn't have to worry about any of these rituals. And we've also seen many instances, and what we'll do, take Prabhupada as a perfect example. He left his body. Of course, it says if one leaves his body in Vrindavan, automatically go back to Godhead, surrounded by devotees in the holy name. Krishna is present in the holy name. So for devotees, we don't really need to worry so much about all these rules, regulations, rituals. We perform them for closure for the family, but for the devotee, the main thing is to yum yum bhakti smaram, whatever one's mind is, that's where they go at the time of death. Hare Krishna.